Good morning. It's great to be back home in Calgary for a very positive announcement. Just over a week ago, I was joined by our Chief Medical Officer for Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, to announce the first stage of Alberta's plan to relaunch our economy. For many Albertans, this was a light at the end of the tunnel that we've been going through since mid-March when Alberta first began to bring in public health measures to protect lives from the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. But because of concerns by our public health officials over growing community spread in Calgary and Brooks in particular, which had 85% of active COVID cases, the difficult decision was made to delay some aspects of reopening to give our public health experts more time to monitor trends in those two communities. And I want to say thank you to folks in Calgary and Brooks for having continued to show great responsibility and a care for others through their conduct over the past couple of weeks, we've been able to see continued positive progress in the fight against COVID-19 in Calgary and Brooks as well as the rest of the province. Calgary now has seen almost 4,000 COVID-affected patients recovered, and there are only 45 COVID-19 patients in hospital, of which 5 remain in intensive care. Too many Albertans are familiar with the heartbreaking impact that COVID-19 has had on our continuing care facilities, which have seen nearly 75% of the lives lost to the pandemic in Alberta. But we are turning a corner in those facilities as well, with an overwhelming majority of cases in continuing care now having recovered. We were all concerned as well about the serious outbreaks at the large meatpacking plants, including JBS in Brooks. I'm pleased to report that over 99% of the employees who had been infected at those plants have since recovered, and the vast majority have voluntarily returned back to work. Thanks to the vigilance of Albertans, we're winning the fight against COVID-19. We have the lowest level of hospitalizations, the lowest level of ICU admissions, and the lowest level of deaths per capita amongst the large Canadian provinces, and we are far, far below the level experienced throughout most of the developed world, and we continue to lead the world on testing. And so I am therefore pleased to announce that on the advice of Alberta's Chief Medical Officer for Health, we are proceeding with the next phases of reopening businesses and services in the communities of Calgary and Brooks. This means that on Monday, May 25th, hairstyling and barbershops will be permitted to reopen in Calgary and Brooks. Cafés, restaurants, and pubs and bars can also reopen for table service at 50% capacity this upcoming Monday. And on June 1st, day camps, including summer school, will be permitted with limits on occupancy in those communities. Post-secondary institutions, including summer school, will be permitted with limits on occupancy. Will be permitted, I should say, within the limits for in-person classes that have been outlined by public health. And places of worship and funeral services will also be expanded if they follow the specific guidelines that have been outlined and have been already the case in the rest of the province. While this is positive news for many, it doesn't mean that we're out of the woods yet. COVID-19 still poses a very real risk, and we must all continue to act responsibly and look out for one another. Alberta so far has lost 132 lives to this pandemic, and that number is still likely to rise over the weeks to come. Each one of those lives lost is a heartbreaking experience for their loved ones and friends. And this is why we must continue to practice physical distancing and enhanced hygiene, to wear masks in areas where we cannot be physically distanced from others, and to just take care especially for the most vulnerable. It's also why the government of Alberta is taking new steps to screen international travelers arriving at our airports and our Coots border crossing. It's also why there are still some restrictions on the size of gatherings, although we did expand that to 50 for outdoor gatherings last Friday. And it's why it will still take some time for things to return to normal. but we're on the right track. And that is because of the classic culture of personal responsibility and care for others, which has always characterized Alberta. So thank you for what you're doing. I'm also pleased to underscore that the Canadian Federation of Independent Business reports today that more businesses are open and operating in Alberta than in any other Canadian province, underscoring that we did this the smart way, in a targeted way, with fewer restrictions impairing our economy, but better results than all of the large population Canadian provinces. So Albertans have a right to be proud of the progress that we've made, and we're delighted that we'll be able to take these next steps in Calgary and Brooks. And with that, I'd like to invite Health Minister Tyler Shandro to add a few remarks.
Thank you, Premier. Well, thank you, Premier, and thank you for joining us here. It's wonderful to be back in Calgary this week, and this province hasn't had enough rain, I don't think, this spring, so this is great weather for us to thank you for joining us here on Scotsman Hill. And to all Albertans, thank you for continuing to follow the public health orders and guidance, as Premier said. Because of your vigilance, our healthcare system is doing a great job in managing COVID-19. While urgent and emergency surgeries have remained available during the pandemic, some non-urgent operations were put on hold so that hospitals would have the capacity to treat a potential wave of critically sick patients. Based on the first projections and not knowing how much we could mitigate that impact, we needed to make sure that a large number of our beds in our hospitals were available, but we flattened the curve. And by following the advice of our Chief Medical Officer of Health, we kept the impact on our communities and our health system far below those early projections. As of yesterday, we dipped to 926 active COVID cases in Alberta. Of those, 59 people are in hospital and 6 are in ICU. Testing is also showing that our hospitals are safe. And as of this week, about 200 hospital staff have tested positive. That's about 3% of total cases to date. And only 29 of those staff are believed to have been infected at work. If we look at doctors working on our hospitals, 27 have tested positive, and none of them are believed to have been infected at work. A few cases are yet to be confirmed, but the data is showing at this time that our healthcare staff are doing an amazing job of preventing transmission of the virus and keeping themselves and patients in the province safe. Hospital staff and physicians put themselves at risk every day, and we should thank them and honor them. But more importantly, we should support them with effective safety measures. And we've done that thanks to the efforts of the staff themselves, the support of AHS management, and the day-to-day work of infection control clinicians like Jeff Taylor, John Conley, Dr. Mark Jaffe, who many of you know because he's been joining our press conferences that we've had in Edmonton, and many others throughout AHS. The numbers also remind us that testing is critical. Alberta remains a world leader in COVID-19 testing with more than 225,000 tests completed to date. Today, I'm pleased to announce that staff and residents in long-term care and in Level 4 Designated Supportive Living, or DSL, can now get tested if they choose, even if they don't have any symptoms. This testing will be offered in phases beginning next week. Voluntary testing will make it easier to detect asymptomatic cases earlier and control possible outbreaks. And we know that people who live in these facilities are at greater risk of severe outcomes if they are infected by the virus. This is a crucial part of our relaunch strategy to build a ring of defense around our most vulnerable in this province. Calgary will reopen more businesses as part of stage 1 of our province's relaunch strategy, effective Monday, as Premier said. To support that step, AHS will be adding an extension to their online self-assessment tool for the Calgary zone. Symptomatic individuals within the Calgary zone will be able to book their own tests now if they live within within 50 kilometers of an assessment center, and if the self-assessment tool indicates a test is required. This new step will make testing more convenient for the public. It will also give our our public health staff quicker access to testing information as we move forward through the relaunch. And we're moving forward in other areas as well. Because our health system is able to cope with COVID-19, we need to set aside fewer beds. If cases rise again, our hospitals will still have extra capacity to accommodate them, and we can move forward with reopening healthcare services, including access to regulated allied health professionals and scheduled surgeries throughout the province. Now, since May 4th, hospitals have performed more than 3,000 non-urgent day surgeries. Now we're ready to take the next step. And I'm pleased to announce that starting this week, scheduled inpatient surgeries, that is, surgeries that require an overnight stay in a hospital, will resume across the province. This includes operations like joint replacements and some heart surgeries as well. And Albertans who have been waiting the longest will get their surgery first. A central booking team will contact patients directly. Different parts of the province will be ready to do overnight surgeries at different times depending on how each area is dealing with the pandemic. The good news goes beyond surgeries as well. Today I'm happy to announce that as of June 3rd, Calgary's South Health Campus and the High River Hospital will again offer maternity services. Now in Calgary, this includes all inpatient labor and delivery, the neonatal intensive care unit, or NICU, and the postpartum and newborn care. Now in High River, all inpatient maternal and newborn services are being restored, and changes to these sites were necessary, but they were hard on moms. They were hard on families, and so I'm very glad to see these services restored. As with all steps with our relaunch, this one depends on a manageable COVID-19 caseload. Hospitals have capacity to handle more COVID-19 cases, and we're going to monitor closely to make sure that the numbers stay well within the capacity that we have in the system. Now we're moving forward based on the evidence and with confidence and with due caution. With increased testing in this province, we're making sure that our most vulnerable Albertans are protected, including those that are in long-term care or DSL-4. DSL-4 facilities, and we're confident that our hospitals can safely restart more services. Now, once again, I'd like to thank everyone for continuing to practice physical distancing, washing their hands, and helping to slow the spread of COVID throughout the province. We're getting through this by taking care of ourselves and each other, and we're going to keep moving forward together. So thank you very much again for joining us this afternoon. All right, it's morning still, isn't it? Is it morning? But it's morning still. Happy to take questions. Happy to take questions.
Premier will now take questions. Operator, can you put the first caller through?
First question is James Keller with the Globe and Mail. Go ahead, James.
Hi, this is a question for the Premier. Can you explain why we're now in the position to continue moving forward on the relaunch, including in Calgary, apparently because the COVID-19 situation is improving, but at the same time, the pandemic is cited as the reason why the Alberta Energy Regulator is suspending some environmental monitoring. Is the goal here to protect public health or to save the industry money?
You'll have to ask the Alberta Energy Regulator. It's an independent regulatory body that makes its own decisions without direction from government. And my understanding from their statement today is that these are decisions that basically companies in some cases have felt conflicted about their ability to comply with the public health orders and also fulfill the regulatory requirements imposed by the Alberta Energy Regulator. So I'm not exactly aware of how those conflicts, what constitute those conflicts, and perhaps the AER could give you more background on that. But I would certainly say that we are making, I think, very strong progress in winning the fight against COVID, but most of our public health orders, restrictions and guidelines obviously remain in place. And that includes the safe operation of workplaces. While it's true that Alberta has allowed about 85% of businesses to continue operating over the past 2 months, representing about 88% of workforce and 96% of our economy, all of those businesses have had to operate within significant constraints around physical distancing, hygiene, and other protocols. So how exactly and in what aspects that's affecting the ability of energy companies to comply with some of those regs, I'm not aware, and again, I'm sure the AER can give you more details on that.
Operator, could you put the next caller through, please?
Next is Terry Reith with CBC. Go ahead, Terry.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, Premier. Thank you so much for taking the call. Joe Biden, the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party in the U.S., has again made some very strong statements referring to we don't want tar sands oil in the U.S. Any thoughts on these latest comments?
Well, I think the comments made by Vice President Biden suggest that he hasn't been well or accurately briefed on the dependence of the American economy on Canadian energy exports. It's a hugely important strategic development for the United States that North America is now energy independent, no longer dependent on imports from OPEC dictatorships like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. That is both in the economic and national security interests of the United States, and it's in part because of increased Canadian energy shipments to the United States, particularly from Alberta heavy crude. Over the past decade, many of the American oil refineries retooled at a cost of tens of billions of dollars in order to process heavy crude, and they have turned increasingly to Alberta to fill that demand as the United States has imposed sanctions on the other major source of heavy oil in the Western Hemisphere, which is Venezuela. I think that's a good thing for the United States. And in particular, Mr. Biden today made comments about the Keystone Pipeline. Well, the Keystone Pipeline began operating a decade ago, and it delivers about 600,000 barrels a day of heavy Alberta crude to refineries primarily in the Midwest and Illinois. So a whole lot of jobs and the economy in the American Midwest are dependent on that supply of energy through the Keystone Pipeline. And so we would hope to have a chance to ensure that Mr. Biden is aware of these facts and also aware that the Building Trades Union, the construction unions, the steelworkers unions, which are traditional supporters of Mr. Biden's party, are strongly in favor of the Keystone XL pipeline expansion, which has already crossed the border, which is creating thousands of jobs on both sides of the border, and which will ensure that the United States is no longer dependent on OPEC crude. He also said something about the Canadian heavy oil industry being not well, first of all, he said that Keystone was not economically viable. In fact, as I said, it's been operating for 10 years. Profitably and successfully, both for the refineries, American consumers, and Canadian producers. Keystone XL is obviously economically viable because the shippers have signed for long-term contracts to ensure that, and the refineries in the U.S. are desperate for the product. He also said that it was that Keystone, and I'm going to assume he meant here Keystone XL, was not environmentally responsible, but in fact, two reports conducted by the U.S. State Department under the leadership of then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and President Barack Obama concluded that Keystone XL would actually reduce CO2 emissions because shipping oil by pipeline means substantially lower emissions than the alternative, which is shipping it by rail. So one way or another, the American economy needs this energy. It will either get it from the socialist dictatorship and OPEC state Venezuela, or from the American ally and democratic free market economy of Alberta. And either it will be shipped from Alberta to U.S. refineries by rail with higher carbon emissions, or safely by pipe with lower carbon emissions. And finally, if I had a chance, I would point out to Mr. Biden that the California heavy crude, including oil that's generated by a lot of his campaign donors in Beverly Hills and Los Angeles, has a much higher carbon profile than Alberta heavy crude. So again, I think that we're going to look forward to an opportunity over the months to come to ensure that the Vice President is aware of these facts.
Operator, please put the next caller through.
Next is Rick Bell with the Calgary Sun. Go ahead, Rick.
Just a question for the Premier. We've had an avalanche of very, very negative and despairing stories, a sort of daily diary of despair over the last several weeks. How do you plan on getting people to sort of switch in attitude from believing that things are really bad, that the sky is falling or will fall very soon, and switch from that to sort of we're on the road back? And at the same time, what will it take to get to stage 2, and what can we do to get us there?
Sure, thanks, Rick. Well, first of all, you know, I just believe in the natural resilience, the toughness of Albertans that is on display now, as it always is during tough times. Let me tell you, the government has been doing some public opinion polling just to keep a tabs on the public's understanding of the public health threat and where we're at in the economy. After the last poll we got, which was following the terrible jobs report in April and the negative oil prices a couple weeks back, actually showed that the optimism of Albertans for our economy next year increased. It went up and not down. This is the only place I can think of in Canada where that would be the case. So there is a natural spirit of optimism in the bones of this province, in its people, in its culture, and that's why I think, you know, we have a stiff upper lip. When we got into this whole thing, I said we needed to have a bit of the Blitz spirit, and of course I was talking about the attitude that the people of London and Britain had when the Luftwaffe was bombing Britain. They didn't let it. The whole reason for that bombing campaign was to try to demoralize people. And you couldn't demoralize the British people then, and you can't demoralize Albertans now. And, you know, the best proof of this is that we've had the lightest touch in terms of public health restrictions in Canada and amongst the lightest restrictions in the world, and yet we've had one of the best public health outcomes. It's not been without losses. It's not been without challenges. But as I said, if you compare us to darn near anywhere in the developed world, we're doing better with lower infections, lower hospitalizations, a lower mortality rate. And that didn't happen through overbearing lockdowns and quarantines like many other places did. It happened mainly because Albertans have an ethic of personal responsibility and caring for others. So I don't need to, as a leader, there's no button I can push to make Albertans optimistic. They are naturally that way, Rick, and I think they're going to see coming out of this opportunities, and we'll be talking about some of those economic opportunities when we launch our economic recovery strategy next month. In terms of the next phase, phase 2, I believe that we are on track. We have said that our target date is June 19. Our public health experts want to continue keeping an eye on the numbers to make sure we don't have sudden outbreaks and sudden surges in hospitalizations. But if we continue with the current direction of the numbers, I mean, get outside of Calgary and there are virtually no new cases happening. I think in the last week in Edmonton, there's been like on average 1 a day. So if we continue to make progress in Calgary and the rest of the province, I think we'll be moving forward with phase 2 as planned.
Operator, could you put the next caller through, please?
Next is Don Braid with the Calgary Herald. Go ahead, Don.
Premier, you've had a week to see what would happen in the rest of the province, not Calgary and Brooks, with restaurants and bars opening up. And I presume you kept a careful eye on that, although I guess it's kind of early. It's kind of a short time frame to see if there is an outbreak that might be caused in restaurants and bars. But do you see any sign that the opening in other parts of the province has caused any concern for opening Calgary? In other words, are you seeing any upticks because of the early opening?
No, Don, we're not, and that's exactly why we're proceeding with confidence on the phase 1 in Calgary and Brooks, and I'm optimistic about moving forward in phase 2 in June. In fact, we've seen the number of new infections and hospitalizations continue to come down right across the province. And I just remind you, Don, that we actually did proceed with phase 1 for opening retail and some other services here in Calgary over a week ago. And really, Dr. Hinshaw, I think what she and her team wanted the extra time for was to see whether opening retail here would lead to a measurable surge in new cases, because she had observed that there were a couple of U.S. states that had opened up retail and saw significant spikes in new infections. And she was concerned, our public health folks were concerned that because we hadn't quite gotten control fully of new cases in Calgary, we had some new cases emerging, the sources of which we could not identify. I think they were understandably anxious that not be transmitted through open retail operations. So we have not seen that. The trend lines continue to go in the down direction here in Calgary, and so. But as I say, we all know we're not out of this. However, the history of influenza pandemics is that they abate in the summer months. And we're not feeling that heat here today, but we will be having, let's hope, a warm Alberta summer, and people getting out and about. And this comes back to Rick's question. We want people to get out and about, and within the limits of the public health guidelines and just prudence, to enjoy life, to get outside. We've opened up the provincial parks, and more services are going to be available, and people shouldn't feel guilty about enjoying those things. Getting out in the sunshine is good for their health, and so I'm optimistic about how we're headed in the summer here. Obviously, we're going to have to keep an eye on things as we go into the fall, because historically these pandemics do come back in the mid-fall.
Operator, could you please put the next caller through?
Next is Chris Varco with the Calgary Herald. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, Premier. I have a couple of questions just about the state of the restaurant industry in this province right now. I'm wondering, a number of restaurants have closed permanently. Some say that they're not getting any rent relief from their landlords. I'm wondering, first of all, what measures are the province considering to assist them to get through to the other side? Secondly, would you consider a ban on commercial tenants being evicted? And thirdly, are you looking at compensating any of the restaurants in Calgary that spent money gearing up for the opening back for May 14th and subsequently weren't allowed to do so?
Chris, what was the first question? Sorry.
Just asking what measures you're considering to help restaurants survive, sure. Particularly those that are struggling right now. Yes.
First of all, our heart goes out to restaurant operators, especially the small owner-operated restaurants, where often a family's life savings are tied up in that enterprise. I think some of the larger chains have obviously have more capacity to get through this, but it's the owner-operated restaurants and bars that are really on the front lines of this downturn and these public health measures. Obviously, we regret that some restaurants had purchased inventory 2 weeks back and were understandably disappointed with the decision that was taken to delay sit-in service. I would point out that we have allowed, of course, takeout service, and we did permit restaurants to do liquor off sales, which has helped some of them to liquidate their liquor inventories and bring some cash in. And of course, as you know, there have been a whole suite of measures introduced by both governments of Alberta and Canada, including we're picking up if they're small restaurants, we're picking up half their WCB costs this year, deferrals on taxes, reductions in property tax rates and business taxes, the federal wage subsidy program, the additional liquidity measures we've offered through Alberta Treasury branches and the federal government as well. And we are looking at additional measures specifically for small and medium-sized businesses, Chris. and urgently. We'll be discussing that at our cabinet this upcoming week, I think on Monday, in fact, to see what additional measures we can take. So I would just say stay tuned for that. But really, I want to encourage Albertans, now that we're well into phase 1 here of our relaunch, to please support your neighborhood restaurants, cafes, and bars. Those are, in many places, a key gathering place in the community, and they need our support now more than ever.
We have time for 2 more questions. Operator, could you please put the next caller through?
Next is Tim Brutch with CTV. Go ahead, Tim.
Hi, yeah, this one's for the Premier as well. Now that we're open across the province, does your government have any plans surrounding masks moving forward, potentially make them mandatory, or if not, even just providing them to everyday citizens?
We don't intend to make them mandatory at this stage, but we strongly encourage people to use masks or face coverings in places where they cannot physically distance from others. That would include, for example, being on a bus or an LRT or in crowded places. So we strongly encourage that. And to be honest with you, I think making it mandatory would create a huge enforcement problem. And as a general rule, our approach has been more of an advisory approach than a heavy-handed restriction approach. There obviously have been some restrictions, but we want to trust people to exercise personal responsibility rather than policing everybody and in a heavy-handed way. So again, it's a very strong recommendation, as long as folks follow the guidelines that our public health officer has put out for wearing and using masks. So for example, a cloth mask that people can make at home, there are guidelines online, and they can be very suitable for most circumstances. Just people have got to, for example, wash them regularly and avoid touching their faces. They adjust them, all those kinds of technical things. But to your larger point, the government of Alberta has ordered 40,000 non-surgical grade masks. We will be announcing, did I say, how many? Did I say 40? That's 40 million. Wow, thank you, Tyler. 40 million non-surgical masks, and I believe 20 million of those may be arriving at, they arrived last night at the Calgary airport?
Edmonton.
Thank you. So I should have had Tyler answering this question. We had 20 million arrive last night at the Edmonton airport. Another 20 million we believe are en route, and we'll be announcing in the next few days our distribution program to get those masks out to people. We won't ever be able to have enough masks to give every one of 4.4 million Albertans every day, but that should make more masks available for people who need them when they need them. There will also, as part of that, there will be a program to get those out to community institutions, charities, homeless shelters, and the like.
Final question. Operator, please put the caller through.
Final question is Audrey Neveau from Radio Canada. Go ahead, Audrey.
Hi. My question is for Premier Kenney. Une question en français, Monsieur Kenney. Concernant la décision de l'Agence de réglementation de l'énergie de ne pas appliquer la surveillance environnementale, comment est-ce que vous expliquez cette décision? Est-ce que vous êtes en accord avec elle?
Avec, excusez-moi, répétez, c'était M. Biden?
Non, c'était à propos de AER.
Ah oui,
l'Agence
ok, oui.
de réglementation de l'énergie. Leur décision de ne pas implanter la surveillance environnementale pendant la pandémie, est-ce que c'est une décision avec laquelle vous êtes en accord?
Écoutez, ça a été une décision prise par un organisme indépendant du gouvernement. Ça veut dire que c'est une agence réglementaire et ils prennent leurs propres décisions. J'ai lu leur communiqué à cet égard qui a dit qu'il y a certaines compagnies qui ont difficulté à conformer avec les ordres de santé publique et en même temps de de faire les ordres de Alberta Energy Regulator. Alors, je ne connais pas les détails de ce conflit-là. Évidemment, nous voulons garder les standards, les réglementations les plus rigoureuses au monde en ce qui concerne la production de l'énergie. Et nous voulons que l'Agence de l'énergie de l'Alberta s'assure un respect pour nos réglementations, mais en même temps, il faut avoir peut-être une certaine flexibilité en ce qui concerne les ordres de santé publique. Alors, je propose que vous déposez les questions de détail auprès de l'Agence réglementaire de l'énergie de l'Alberta. Merci beaucoup. All right, thanks, folks. Hope you didn't get
That's
too
all the
wet.
time we have for today. Thank you very much.